Hello, hello, hello. This is candibknittin. I am Candy B. I be knitting. I hope you be knitting too. And we're going to talk about some knitting today. When I was thinking about what I was going to talk about this week, I was looking at all my works in progress. And I noticed something that is kind of out of sorts for me. I finished my ranunculus last week. And, oh, by the way, I'm wearing a store-bought sweater. This is not a hand-knit sweater. Just that I put that out there. But I finished my ranunculus last week, and I was looking at what I had on the needles, what I was about to cast on, and literally everything I have coming up is for other people, which usually that's an inverse relationship. Usually I'm knitting mostly for myself, and then I try to put in one or two things that are gift items. And that was just interesting. And so I thought today I'd talk about gift knitting since we are entering a season where people will be knitting gifts for people. And I just want to talk about my philosophy and how I approach knitting for others. In general, knitting is not my first foray into the creative, but I have, done a lot of other creative things. I've painted, I've done performance art, and there is this idea that when you are a creative person, you somehow owe it to the rest of the world. Like, don't hide your light under a bushel. You must go out and share this gift, and whether that means giving away free labor, or whether that means somehow monetizing your hobby or your passion. And I really don't identify with that. When I started knitting, I came across this phrase, selfish knitting, and I was just like, that's really bizarre. I don't really see a lot of other hobbies described as selfish. Like if you're a movie buff and you go to the movies by yourself, you're selfish. Or if you, there's a whole culture around teaching a man to fish so he can fish for himself, not giving him fish. But somehow when you're a knitter, or you are a painter, or you're a quilter, or you're a sewist, somehow it's just expected that you're going to give of yourself. And I don't see any, just like I'm not a selfish person because I knit for myself, no one else is somehow morally superior because they make things for others. And I have seen people get really wrapped around the axle and stress themselves out knitting for others. And it's like, do what you want. That's how I approach it. I knit things when I feel like knitting them for the people I feel like knitting for, whether it's me, whether it's someone else. I think that is partially due to the fact that when starting off knitting, the easiest thing to do when you're measuring, when you're thinking about stuff, is to A, think about the colors and things that you would personally like, and B, I am available to myself to measure my head, to try on a sock as I go, to try out different techniques and things like that without a lot of extra input. I also inherently appreciate the thing that I'm creating because I understand what's going into it. Some people are just as content with a store-bought hat as they are a hand knit hat. And so, am I going to stress myself out knitting a hat for someone that could, is indifferent to it? Probably not. But that being said, there is a selfish part to knitting for others too, because as I've grown in my knitting career, there's less things that I need to knit for myself. There's less space for me to fill up with knitting for myself. And also along the way, a lot of people have shown appreciation and respect and support of my knitting. And I do enjoy, it's not like, oh, just because I like to knit for myself, I hate knitting for others. It's just, I prioritize myself. And then, as I have time, I knit for others. And so it is a way to maybe try out new techniques, try out colors I wouldn't have tried out, and also show appreciation to the people in my life. And so I am going to show you some of the things I'm working on for others. This isn't necessarily motivated by the holidays. Probably when I finish this stuff, I'll just give it to the person, because that's also my approach to gift knitting. I don't feel like, oh, it's so-and-so's birthday, I have to give it to them on their birthday. as I finish things, as I think of that person, I'm very much a, oh, saw this and thought of you kind of person. But I'm more likely to see wool and think of others as it gets colder outside. And in North America, we're going into fall, going into winter. It would be a little strange for me to knit, wool socks for someone in July and give them to them. This is kind of like a season where that kind of gift feels more appropriate, whether it's for Christmas or Hanukkah or something else. So I'm going to start with some socks I'm making for Mr. Rulud. I previously mentioned this on the podcast. I made him, on the episode where I talked about socks, I talked about wanting to try, I love top-down socks with a slip stitch heel flap. That's my go-to sock for my foot and my foot shape. And it's also a method I've memorized. But my Mr. Rulud has flat feet. He's a different build than I do. He's a different body, different needs, as you were. And so I wanted to I want to try out different heels for him and see what he likes, because he is someone that's shown a lot of appreciation and support of my knitting, and I want him to have warm feet. And so this is my first bottom up sock and my first Flegel heel sock. I specifically wanted to try out the Flegel heel because I heard it's the best for people with flat feet, and it just hugs the foot in a different way. I have a rather, I wouldn't say delicate, but I have thinner ankles than Mr. Rulud. I have a narrower heel than Mr. Rulud, and he has more of a rectangular flat foot. And so I really wanted to try to find something that was going to fit him in a way that was going to be a little bit more comfortable, because if you're going to go to the effort of making a custom fit sock, you might as well, really make it custom. And this pattern is the Time Traveler sock by Liz Sedmak, and it's a free pattern on Ravelry. All the patterns I talk about, hopefully most of the yarn that I talk about, is going to be in the description box below. And it's a toe-up sock with a Flegel heel. I just typed in Flegel heel on Ravelry and found a free pattern just so I could get, I don't want to pay for a pattern and then, hate it. I did Judy's Magic Cast On, and I am such a creature of habit. I actually Googled a video on how to do Judy's Magic Cast On and DPNs, and go up, you do your Flegel heel, and then I did a 1x1 rib just because I felt like it. Like I could just, with ribbing, when I make hats, when I make socks, usually this, tell me in the comments if you do this, like the yarn tells me what kind of ribbing it likes the most, and whatever rhythm I'm in, it tells me. And I just thought it would look real handsome with a 1x1 rib. And I do 80 stitches for Mr. Rulud. And the pattern is fine. It's not my favorite way to knit, but it's also a new way of knitting. So it was a bit of an adjustment. I've gotten to the point where if I'm going top down, my SSKs and my knit two togethers come very naturally when I'm closing up that heel flap gusset. And the Flegel heel involves a lot of make one lefts and a lot of make one rights, and I am not at the point in my knitting career where I have memorized those, and so it was a bit of a struggle. Usually I knit socks on my lunch break at work, and at a certain point I was just like, sitting down for 20 to 30 minutes working on this sock is not where I need to be mentally. I literally brought them home and just spent a whole evening and got through the whole heel, because just starting and stopping and picking up, picking down, and every other row trying to figure out where my make ones were supposed to be was not the jam. And so maybe, if I make 5, 10, 20 pairs of these, they'll become the jam, but it was not the jam. The yarn is a sock blank, and this is also my first time knitting from a sock blank. This is the second sock I literally just did. Pulled up my YouTube tutorial on Judy's Magic Cast On, and this time I did it on circulars because I was like, let me stop being a butt. But this is a sock blank, and it is a flat piece of fabric that is then you unravel it as you knit. And I got this from a D-stash from Hey Brownberry. Had a D-stash. If you don't know who Hey Brownberry is, turn off my video, go find Hey Brownberry, because her videos are much better than mine. And I want to say, based on her, she wrote excellent notes. She was destashing a bunch of scrap yarn, and this was in the scraps. And this is a sock blank that I'm pretty sure she dyed herself. And so the idea being that when you have a sock blank, you can plan out your coloring that much easier, and kind of create, it's a fun way to create self-striping yarn, because I don't know if you guys know much about dyeing, but it can be difficult to have a skein of yarn and plan out where the stripes are going to be. And so it's a neat way of doing that. And I actually have some blank sock blanks, so now I can kind of mimic how she did her colors here, because basically it's stockinette, so it's rolling. So the very edge is a stripe, a vertical stripe of gray, then it goes into this black, then there's this green, then it goes back into black. And what it created are these little tiny like micro stripes of black, green, and gray. And yeah, superwash merino. It's a palette sock blank. So I believe this is from Knit Picks, and she hand dyed this. And Mr. Rulud saw this and was just like, "Ooh, what is that? That is cool." And I was just like, "It's yours, babe." And so I knit him up these socks. Pretty cool. What else do I have to say about this? Knitting from a sock blank. That's what I wanted to talk about. Really neat way of working, because usually I knit from balls. I have I cake up a yarn ball on my my ball winder, or sometimes I'll just pull it right out of the bullet skein, and it can collapse on me and get a little bit tangled. But this, it just, as I need yarn, and as long as I tension properly. I have some places where my tension is a bit uneven, especially using the DPNs. But I kind of went through and cleaned it up with a crochet hook. And the only other thing is, that's why I was very comfortable doing socks with this, because this is a new sock pattern to me, but I'm also very comfortable knitting socks in general. And so I don't know if I had started on a more complex project and then made a mistake and had to rip it out, I would have to cake it up, basically, because I wouldn't be able to put it back into the sock blank. But just pulling it as I go, it works really well just for basic socks, because I can see where Marceline at the bottom here maybe had started it and wasn't happy with what was going on and had to put a stitch marker in it to get the yarn to hold back together. Am I a convert to toe-up socks? I'm of two minds. This is where Candy A comes back, and Candy A is just like, "Oh, that's so great! You're learning new techniques." And Mr. Rulu tried this sock on today, and literally it was a Homer Simpson type ooh. And I was just like, "Do you feel the difference in the fit?" And he was like, "Absolutely, this is great." And I was just like, "Oh, that's great. I've learned a new technique, and I've learned a technique that's actually worth my input. I worked really hard learning this new technique, and it's paying off. And now I can, do magic loop socks, and I can do 2 at a time socks, and it's just going to expand my palette." And then there's Candy B, who's just like, "Or you could just go back to making socks the way you want. And you can just, it's like, ain't nobody got time to be sitting here making toe-up socks, And so I'm always of two minds, but Candy C does want to try to do a short row heel for him, because I have not done a short row heel, and I don't like short row heels, because there's something that changes in the tension when I start, doing the short rows flat versus my tension in the round, and it doesn't fit my heel just the way I want it. But that's the last thing I want to try for him, is a short row heel. And whatever, 1, 2, or 3, whichever one he picks, I will continue to make socks the way he likes them, because he has shown a lot of appreciation for them, and the fact that he can recognize the different techniques and the different, and he's such an eye for yarn and color. I really do enjoy knitting for him a lot. The next thing I want to show y'all is a project I showed y'all a while ago. I was working on the quick ombre hat for my daughter's teacher, and I showed y'all the brim, and I was working worsted weight yarn on size 8 needles, and I actually didn't like the way the tension was coming out or the gauge was coming out, and so I actually ripped out that little 1/2 inch of brim I showed y'all a few episodes ago and started over again on size 7 needles. And now I have finished that hat. This is the Quick Ombré hat by Emily Dormier, and it's another free Ravelry pattern. Great pattern if you're looking for like a first color work project or a project that has charts. There's color work charts that you can use, but it's, very straightforward, very simple. But there's also charts for different sizes, so the motif changes. If it's a baby hat, the striping is a little less striping, and it just is meant to fade, from this blue color into like this rusty orange color. The yarn is Little Fox yarn, and it is a Richmond, Virginia yarn. It is 200 yards per 115 grams of superwash merino worsted weight. And this is the fried pumpkin colorway. And I actually had to go on Ravelry because I don't have the ball band for this, and this yarn's been discontinued. The base is called the Mere base. It's MERE base, and this is the, I believe, the peacock color, so it's like a tealish color. And quick, easy. I did it in one afternoon. Oh, it's also good if you want to learn knitting in the round. Knitting a hat is a great way to pick up knitting in the round. I did it on size 8. It calls for size 8 needles. Did it in size 7. And this whole hat maybe used 30 to 40 grams. And so I had plenty of yarn left over. And so I was just, because I was like, oh, if I have some yarn left over, maybe I can make some fingerless mitts. And I had so much yarn over, I was like, I'm going to make some full-on mittens. And so I did these mittens. And these are the World's Simplest Mitts by Tin Can Knits. And what I did for this, though, because the pattern does is written for solid yarn, I took the chart and the concept from the Quick Ombré hat and just translated it to the mitten. The stitch counts aren't perfect for it, but the idea is that it's supposed to be just kind of ombreing or, fading from one color to another. And so I just kind of played around with it, and it's not, you can see here, it's not the same exact pattern as the hat, but it's, reminiscent enough, and it has the same concept, basically. If you read the pattern, you know the math behind how these rows work out. The only thing I didn't do, if you notice in the hat, there's stitches where you would have 3 stitches in your main color, 1 stitch in your contrast color, and here I only did 1 by 1 color work because I didn't want to have floats. And the last thing I want when I'm reaching my hand into a mitten is to get tangled up in yarn, so I wanted to keep really short floats inside. But I like the idea of having floats inside because this is a superwash yarn, and so it's not going to have the warmth of 100% raw wool. And so adding that extra layer of 1 by 1 color work is really going to make it sing. And for this, it's a Tin Can Knits pattern. And I use this is my first time doing a Tin Can Knits pattern, and I use the Tin Can Knits app, which is available on the Apple Store, available on Google Play. I have an Android, so I get it on the Google Play Store. And if y'all aren't familiar with Tin Can Knits, stop watching my show and go look up Tin Can Knits. They write patterns. They have an array of patterns. I mentioned them briefly because I was looking at one of their blanket patterns when I was thinking about doing a quilt-inspired blanket. And they are most known, though, for their series of free patterns, and free patterns that come in a variety of gauges. So there's a hat. It's all like the World's Simplest Mitts are the World's Simplest Mitts, but everything else is like grain inspired. So they have a barley hat, a flax sweater, rye socks, and they write the pattern for a variety of yarns, fingering to worsted weight yarns, usually the baby size all the way through adult. And now they have a app you can use to download to work through their patterns, and any paid patterns you buy from them you can download into the app as well. And so I wanted to give that a shot and also make these mittens, because I've been meaning to make some basic mittens, because I think that's just a great gift idea in general. And it's pretty cool. The pros to the app I like is that, like I said, they have 3-4 different gauges in their patterns made for maybe a dozen sizes. And anyone who has made a pattern that has that much, I talked about the ranunculus pattern, and that's, got 8 sizes in it. And the idea of going through and circling the right, and I've done that before, where I've gone through and circled all my numbers for my size and then circled the wrong stitch count somewhere. And so the idea that you go into this app, you pick your size, and they only show you the directions for your size is like a game changer. It's a shame that, there's not another app that has this feature. It's only for their designs, but a lot of other designs could use that feature. I love it. The idea that, you can, go in, you label, you can put notes in there. You put in what yarn you're using. You can label it for what project you're on. It did take me kind of playing around with it to figure out how to show progress. There's like an arrow that you have to tap to go to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, and it'll highlight what row you're on. I'm very paper and pen when it comes to my pattern, so I like, crossing out, what I've done already, and I like tally marks and stuff like that. So it doesn't, in that sense, it doesn't jive with the way my brain works all the time. But it does take you through pattern repeats, which I like. Like if it says do it 5 times, you click that arrow to advance the pattern, and it'll tell you, oh, you've done this repeat 1 time. You've done it 2 of 5 times, 3 of 5 times. But, even though I don't, and there's like this, the highlighting is a little light for me too, for my vision. But on the flip side, they're such simple, straightforward patterns. I really don't need to look at the pattern for that much. Like basically I needed to know where to do my increases, and then I used the app to mark how many increases I had done. But other than that, it's mostly knit to this length, knit to this length, knit to this length, then you do your decreases, and the decreases are really easy to memorize. And so if it was a more complex pattern, or if it was something that had like a complex lace motif or something like that, I would have struggled a little bit more. But because I was already working on something simple, and I've made mittens before, so I kind of know how things go. The other positive thing is that you're in this app, but you can expand the steps, and the steps will, you can, there's hyperlinks within it where it'll take you to their website and show you the tutorial for what you're working on. Or if you're halfway through the pattern and you're like, what does BOR stand for again? You click on it and it's like, oh, beginning of round. Awesome. I would recommend, if you're working with the app, definitely use your notes feature, and definitely name the pattern something so that you know exactly what you're working on. Because I started the mittens and I was working in the wrong size, and I was like, oh, and so I made it very obvious when I started the project, hey, these are small mittens for Miss so-and-so. Because once you have 2, 3, 4, 5 projects you're working on in this app, you need something that's going to quickly tell what you're working on. Because at a certain point I had 2 or 3 different mitten patterns open, and I didn't remember which one was this mitten pattern. And that brings me to my next point. The other downfall to it is that in order to see the pattern, you have to pick what size you're working on. Like you go in and you create it's more about creating the project and working through the project. And for me, when I decide to knit something, I always read the entire pattern first with all of the numbers, and then when I'm swatching, I'm still not 100% sold on whatever size I'm working on. So I do like to see what each size does, where the increases are, and how the whole thing plays out. But you kind of have to commit to the project and then read through that size. And if that's not the right size, you delete that project and you create a new project. So in a sense, you still would need Ravelry or some other third party if you wanted to print out the whole pattern and read the whole pattern from beginning to end. At least that's what it seemed like to me. If there is a feature where I can go in and see the whole pattern and print out the whole pattern, let me know. But to me, it felt like, this is more of like a project tracking app than a go in and read patterns kind of app. I did like it enough. I like it so much that I'm definitely going to use it for some of my other seasonal knitting. Both of my kids need mittens for this season. And, usually with knitting for children, I'm very much like, oh, they're just going to lose them, or they're going to get dirty, or they're going to end up balled up in the laundry and end up, washed on hot and then dried on hot, or whatever the case might be. But I've come to find out, my kids actually do like my knitting and a lot. They ask a lot of questions. They watch, yarn YouTube with me. And I know as a parent that phase does not last forever. Like, at a certain point, they're going to, either, go off on their own, live their lives, or be like, oh, knitting's kind of silly. I don't really want hand knitted stuff from my parent. But right now, they have an interest in it. So I want to really feed that interest. And also, like last year, I bought mittens for my younger kid, from Amazon, and they, the quality wasn't there, the fit wasn't right. I don't know if any other parents can relate, but everyone assumes that children are like shaped like Roblox or something. Like, it's just like, who is this supposed to fit, and where are these sizes coming from? And so the idea that I can, not spend, use my hobby to make something nice for my kids, something decent for my kids, something that's going to fit them, and it'll fit them for a while. I bought this yarn. This is Mighty Stitch yarn by Knit Picks, and it is 80% acrylic, 20% superwash, and it's nice and soft. It's superwash, so I can wash it. It's got a little bit of wool in it for that warmth, and the thing about superwash is that it does grow over time, and so if I choose my tension properly, it could fit them for a couple of years. And if they lose one mitten, I can knit them another. There's no right or left mitten in the Simplest Mitts pattern, by the way, and so I can just keep knitting them mittens if they lose one. It's not that big of a deal. Kids will be kids. I bought this eggplant color, and this color's called Marina, because my kids are very much into being even. Everything's got to be the same. Oh, she got more than me, or no, oh, I want that, and so I try to make them the same things, but at the same time, they're also territorial, where they're like, oh, that's, we want the same things, but I need to know which one is mine. And they've kind of naturally gravitated towards, one of them is more team purple and one of them is more team teal. So I'll be able to make them gloves in their signature colors, which is another benefit. You can go out and pick the exact color that they want. Allegedly, I know when I finish them, they'll be like, oh, pink's my favorite color now. Whatever. I was going to make the barley hat from them, same app, but I was like, okay, they'll need gloves, they'll need hats. And then I was like, oh, I might have some yarn over. I can make them a cowl or something. And I was like, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 things that they would have to keep track of. Let me simplify this for them. And so I'm actually planning on making kind of a hood / balaclava type situation. I was looking at patterns the other day, and I think I have an idea of how to make them. I'm going to cast on a certain amount of stitches flat, then go into a kind of a turtleneck situation, and then kind of cast off some stitches in the front to kind of get a round face, knit flat, then 3 needle bind off on the head, and then maybe pick up ribbing for the face. I think that's going to work. I'll try the smaller kid first and see if my idea, how I'm imagining this is going to play out. But I figure that way their necks are protected, their heads are warm, but it's all in one piece. And if their heads get too hot, they might be able to pull it off. We'll see. But that's another thing too. Like, if I'm always just knitting for myself, I'm going to knit just the same things over and over again. And knitting for someone else, thinking about someone else's needs, someone else's taste, it's like, oh wow, I could design a balaclava. I never would have made a balaclava for myself, because I'm an adult and I can keep track of my scarves most of the time. So that's all I wanted to show y'all today. Are y'all gift knitting at all, in the near future for the fall and winter months? Let me know what you're making for others. Let me know who's your favorite person to knit for. Is it yourself? That's great. Is it someone else you care about? That's awesome. Is it strangers? Is it charity knitting? Let me know in the comments. Aside from that, I hope you do all of the YouTube things. Share this video, comment, like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Rulude, shoot me an email, candibknittin@gmail.com. Hit me up on Ko-fi, at Rulude on Ko-fi. Until the next time, peace.